Taylor Swift's billionaire journey. From country girl to icon, what does it really take to turn heartbreak into a billion-dollar empire? Before the sold-out stadiums, before the private jets and record-breaking tours, there was just a teenage girl with a guitar and a relentless obsession to be heard. But the version of Taylor Swift the world celebrates today wasn't built overnight, and it definitely wasn't accidental. Every lyric, every reinvention, every business decision carried a level of precision most people never noticed. But here's the real question. Was this journey driven by talent alone, or something far more strategic? Because once you start looking beneath the surface, her rise stops looking like luck and starts looking like a system. At first glance, Taylor Swift's story feels familiar. A small-town girl moves to Nashville, chases a dream, gets discovered, and rises to fame. It's the kind of narrative we've seen countless times. But the deeper you go, the more that narrative starts to feel incomplete, because from the very beginning, there were signals that this wasn't going to follow a normal path. Taylor didn't just enter the music industry, she studied it. As a teenager, she wasn't only writing songs, she was observing how labels operated, how artists were positioned, how control was distributed. And that early awareness shaped one of the most important decisions of her career, signing with Big Machine Records. Now, here's where things get interesting. At the time, Big Machine was a relatively new label. Not the biggest, not the most powerful, but that was exactly the point. It gave her something most new artists don't get: leverage, space, a voice in how her music would be marketed and released. While other artists were being shaped by their labels, Taylor was quietly learning how to shape herself. But even then, the question remains, was this instinct or intention? Because control would later become the defining theme of her entire career. Her early albums, Taylor Swift, Fearless, Speak Now, weren't just commercially successful, they were strategically positioned. She wasn't just selling music, she was building relatability. Writing her own songs created authenticity. Sharing personal stories built emotional investment. An emotional investment creates something incredibly powerful: loyalty. But here's something worth thinking about. How many artists truly own their narrative from the beginning? Because in Taylor's case, the narrative wasn't just organic, it was curated. And then came the first major transformation. With Red, she started shifting away from pure country into a more hybrid sound. And by the time 1989 arrived, the transition to full pop was complete. This wasn't just a musical evolution, it was a market expansion. Country had limits, pop was global, and suddenly her audience didn't just grow. It exploded. But transitions like that are risky. Artists lose fans all the time when they change their sound. So, why didn't she? Because the foundation wasn't genre, it was identity. Her fans weren't just connected to her music, they were connected to her, which meant she could evolve without losing relevance. In fact, evolution became part of her brand. Now pause for a moment and think about that. What if the real asset wasn't the music, but the relationship with the audience? Because once that relationship is strong enough, everything else becomes flexible. And this is where things take a sharper turn. In 2019, something happened that most casual listeners didn't fully understand, but it changed everything. Taylor's master recordings, the original versions of her first 6 albums, were sold without her ownership. The deal involved Scooter Braun and set off a chain reaction that would redefine her career. At face value, it looked like a dispute. But underneath, it was a power shift, because instead of accepting the loss, Taylor did something almost unprecedented. She decided to re-record her own albums. Now think about how bold that is, recreating years of work, releasing it again, asking fans to choose the new versions over the originals. On paper, it sounds risky, even unrealistic, but in practice, it worked. Albums like Fearless, Taylor's version, and Red, Taylor's version, didn't just perform well, they dominated charts. Fans didn't just support the move, they amplified it, and suddenly, What looked like a setback became a strategic advantage. Because now, she wasn't just an artist, she was an owner. And ownership changes everything. It shifts where the money flows. It shifts who controls distribution. It shifts long-term value. So ask yourself this: how many artists turn a loss into leverage like that? Because this wasn't just about reclaiming music. It was about redefining power in the industry. And the ripple effects didn't stop there. Streaming platforms, licensing deals, film placements. All of these depend heavily on who owns the masters. By re-recording her catalog, Taylor effectively created a parallel system, one where she controlled the primary assets, which means every time a Taylor's version song is streamed, licensed, or used commercially, the value flows back to her, not away from her. And if you step back and look at the bigger picture, something becomes clear. This wasn't a reaction, it was a recalibration, a move that transformed her from a top-tier artist into something much more powerful, a self-contained brand ecosystem. But here's where the curiosity deepens. Because if control was the turning point, what came next wasn't just about maintaining it. It was about scaling it. And in the next part, we're going to break down exactly how Taylor Swift turned that control into billionaire-level influence. From record-breaking tours to strategic business moves that most people never even notice. Because the real story isn't just how she became successful. It's how she built something that keeps growing, long after the music is released. If the first phase of Taylor Swift's journey was about building control, then what came next was about scale. Not just getting bigger, but becoming unavoidable. Because once you own your music, your narrative, and your audience, the next logical move isn't just to grow, it's to multiply impact across every layer of the industry. And this is where things stop looking like a music career and start looking like infrastructure. Let's begin with the moment that quietly shifted her into a completely different financial category. The Eras Tour. On the surface, it was a concert tour, a celebration of her discography. But the execution? That's where it becomes something else entirely. The Eras Tour wasn't just designed to perform music. It was designed to maximize value across multiple verticals simultaneously. Ticket demand alone reached historic levels. Entire platforms crashed under the pressure. Stadiums sold out within minutes. But here's the deeper question. Why did demand spike to that extreme? Because Taylor didn't just sell tickets, she sold access to identity. Each era represented a different phase of her life, and by extension, her fans' lives. People weren't just attending a concert. They were stepping into a timeline they emotionally lived through. That level of attachment transforms a product into an experience, and experiences scale differently. Reports estimate the Eras Tour generated over $1 billion in revenue, making it one of the highest-grossing tours in history. But again, don't stop at the number. Ask what's behind it, because revenue doesn't equal profit. And this is where Taylor's strategic control becomes critical. Unlike traditional artists who rely heavily on external promoters and structures, her level of ownership and negotiation power allows her to retain a significantly larger share of the upside. So while others participate in tours, she architects them. But the tour wasn't the endpoint, it was a launch pad. Instead of letting the momentum fade, Taylor extended the life cycle of the Eras Tour into film, partnering directly with AMC Theaters to distribute Taylor Swift. The Eras Tour concert film. Now pause and think about that decision. Most artists would go through traditional studio systems, middlemen, complex distribution chains. But Taylor bypassed that. She went direct, and that changes margins dramatically. The film went on to generate hundreds of millions globally, becoming one of the highest-grossing concert films ever. But more importantly, it demonstrated something far bigger. She doesn't just create content. She controls how it's delivered. And when you control both creation and distribution, you're no longer just part of the industry. You're reshaping it. But let's zoom out even further, because tours and films are still extensions of music. The real question is, How does she operate outside of music? This is where brand positioning becomes critical. Taylor's partnerships aren't random endorsements. They're selective, timed, and aligned with her image. Whether it's collaborations with global companies or strategic product integrations, every move reinforces the same thing: trust. And trust, at scale, becomes monetizable. But here's something subtle most people overlook. Taylor doesn't overexpose herself. In a world where influencers constantly push products, she maintains scarcity. And scarcity increases perceived value. So when she does align with something, it carries weight, which means she's not just monetizing attention, she's curating it. And that distinction is everything. Now let's talk about assets, because this is where billionaire status becomes tangible. Taylor owns an extensive real estate portfolio across the United States. Properties in Nashville, New York, Los Angeles, Rhode Island, each worth millions. But again, don't just see luxury, see positioning. These aren't random homes. They're located in key cultural and economic hubs, centers of media, entertainment, and influence. Places where proximity matters. And proximity, in business, creates opportunity. But even beyond physical assets, her most powerful holdings are intangible: her catalog, her masters. Especially the re-recorded Taylor's version albums are long-term revenue engines. Streaming, licensing, sync deals, commercials, films, these generate income continuously, not once, not occasionally, but indefinitely. So ask yourself, what's more valuable, a one-time hit song or a catalog that earns for decades? Because Taylor didn't just chase hits. She built a library, and libraries compound. But here's where things become even more interesting, because at this level, money is no longer the primary metric. Influence is. Taylor's ability to mobilize her audience is almost unmatched. When she speaks, markets respond. When she releases, platforms surge. When she tours, entire local economies see measurable impact. From hotels to restaurants to transportation. That's not just celebrity, that's economic force. And once you reach that level, your decisions ripple outward in ways most people can't even quantify. But again, this kind of influence isn't accidental. It's built on consistency. For over a decade, Taylor has maintained a connection with her audience that feels personal, even at a global scale, through storytelling, through vulnerability, through controlled transparency. And that creates something rare. Not just fans, but advocates. People who don't just consume, but support, defend, and amplify. And when your audience becomes your distribution network, growth stops being linear, it becomes exponential. But here's a question worth sitting with: is this level of control sustainable forever? Because every system, no matter how strong, faces pressure. Cultural shifts, industry changes, new competitors, evolving audience expectations. And yet, Taylor continues to adapt, from country to pop, from physical albums to streaming, from traditional releases to surprise drops, from artist to entrepreneur to industry disruptor. Each transition carefully timed, carefully executed. So maybe adaptability is the real core of her system. Not just control, not just ownership, but evolution. Because in an industry where most careers peak and decline, she's done something different. She's extended relevance. And relevance, in today's economy, is currency. But let's bring this full circle, from a teenage girl in Nashville to a billionaire with global influence. What actually made the difference? Was it talent? Yes. But talent alone isn't rare. Was it timing? Partly. But timing without strategy fades. Or was it something deeper? An understanding that success isn't just about creating value, but capturing it, scaling it, and protecting it. Because if you look closely, every major decision in her career aligns with that principle. Write your own songs, control your narrative, re-record your albums, reclaim your assets, build direct fan relationships, own your distribution, expand into tours and film, maximize each product lifecycle, invest in real estate and catalogs, secure long-term wealth. It's not random. It's a system. And once you see it, you start to realize something. Taylor Swift didn't just become a billionaire because of music. She became a billionaire because she understood the business of being Taylor Swift. And that's a completely different game. So the next time you hear one of her songs, or see headlines about her tours, her earnings, or her lifestyle, pause for a second, look beyond the surface, and ask yourself, are you watching an artist succeed? Or are you watching a system operate exactly as it was designed to? And now the question is yours. Do you think Taylor Swift's journey was driven more by talent or by strategy? Was it the music that built the empire or the decisions behind it? And if you had to choose one lesson from her rise, what would it be? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's break it down together. If you want more deep dives that go beyond the headlines, where we don't just show you success but decode it, then make sure you like this video, share it with someone who needs to see the bigger picture, and subscribe to CelebSpot. Because here, we don't just follow fame, we reveal what's really behind it.